Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. The concluding session of the second day of the second Association for Borderland Studies World Conference. My name is Ted Boyle. It's my distinct honor and pleasure to chair this final session that looks at borders and boundaries in Asia. It's going to focus particularly on borders in South Asia. This session's been made possible through the support and cooperation of a number of individuals who I'd just like to mention here at the start. Particularly our Borders and Boundary in Asia component of the conference was organized by Professors Akihiro Iwashita, Dhananjay Tripathi, and myself. And under this umbrella, we had 8 sessions that have occurred over the past 2 days. So I'd like to thank all the presenters who came and shared their thoughts there. This particular session has been specially supported by, as part of the Border Making and Its Consequences Global Track selection of the conference. So for that, we'd like to thank the conference organizer, Magdal Dwenken, and everyone at the University of Vienna who's made this possible. We have 3 excellent looking papers today. I'm sure they will prove excellent in content as well. The first of them is by my co-organizer, Dhananjay Tripathi, the South Asian University. And he will look at border as a factor in bilateral ties, studying India-Nepal relations post-Madhesi movement. The second paper is Udipta Ranjan Barua, who's a colleague of Dhananjay at South Asian University. And he's going to take on the small and easily resolved task of looking towards a historical sociology of borders in South Asia. And finally, we'll hear a presentation from Krishnendra Meena of Jawaharlal Nehru University, who's going to look at borders and bordering practices, the case study of Jaisalmer along the India-Pakistan border. And we're delighted discussing these papers will be Melanie van den Helskin, also of the University of Vienna, who at a very late stage agreed to come on board with us and comment on these papers. So we're really grateful for her participation. So with that, my job is done for the next hour or so. I'd like to ask each of the presenters to do about 20 minutes, and then we'll take comments from Melanie and go from there. So Dhananjay, the floor is yours, as they say.
Thank you, Edward, for this very generous introduction, and thank you for organizing this panel. I'm here to discuss about India-Nepal relations post-Madhesi movement in regard to the border, how borders started playing a role between India and Nepal. Generally, if you talk about South Asia and the conflicts, one of the pictures which emerge immediately is India-Pakistan. That's 2 nuclear power, not having a cordial relation, and always having some sort of problems over an issue of Kashmir. But if you look at the South Asia, there's an entire realm of bilateral relationship that has been ignored from the regional academia as well as international academia because of their obsession with India-Pakistan relation. But if you look at different bilateral relationship, you will realize that there is a very interesting patterns. And for a border studies scholars, we can link it with border. We can see how borders are playing a very important role. So generally, it has been perceived that India and Nepal are very friendly countries. Traditionally, they are sharing a lot of things like religion, culture, a lot of things. But we have seen in recent times that a lot of issues are emerging between India and Nepal. And what I'm trying to argue here, that it started with the Madhesi movement. And there was a bit of up and down in this relationship in last like 4 or 5 years. And I started from the period of 2015 when the Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Nepal, and it was a visit of an Indian Prime Minister after 17 years to Nepal. And he was received very well by that country, and we all know that there was a very devastating earthquake in Nepal, and India offered a lot of help. And there was all like goodwill being generated for India at that point of a time. But something happened in September 2015. And from there onwards, the relationship has deteriorated, and borders, it is an open and a porous border between India and Nepal. I can just go to Nepal. It's so open. I just need one identity card. But right now, after 2015, a lot of issues emerged on border issues between India and Nepal, and that is affecting the relationship as of now. What is the idea of borders in South Asia? I will like to give a bit of focus on that. South Asia is a bit different. We are a post-colonial region. We have our obsession with territory, whether it's India, Pakistan. You know, I'm sure you must be aware of how India is fencing its border with Bangladesh. There's a 6th largest land border in the world. It's almost like some 4,096.7 kilometers of borders India is fencing. That is something we describe it as a very crazy idea. But that is what India is doing. And why? What is the argument of India? The New Delhi argues that it is to have a secure borders, because they call it like a lot of illegal immigrants are coming from Bangladesh, and also the smugglers. So we are securing our borders. So fencing is very, very important. The government has invested a lot of money in this, by the way. And you know India is a poor country, but fencing. So that is, it's come from the idea of security and borders. The second you all must be aware of the unresolved issue of Durand line between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And it's also one of the most unsecure border regions of the world. Also, like we have seen that this idea of security with the borders have become more and more stronger in this part of the world. And that is after post 9/11. We all know that many things is happening in this part of the world as far as the borders are concerned. But there was something which was unique about India-Nepal border, and that was a a very easy movement of trade and people across the border. That is something very, very uncommon about South Asia, because if I wanted to come to Europe, it's easy for me, but if I wanted to go to Bangladesh or Pakistan, it's not easy for me, you know. Getting a visa will be a bit of a difficulty. So India-Nepal, in that sense, was a bit of an exception. And there's a history behind India-Nepal borders. It started, who have created these borders? Again, because India was a colony of United Kingdom. So it is the British who have created this border. It started with 1814 with the Gorkha War. There was no discrimination there was no border between India and Nepal before that. And there was a lot of territories of Nepali kings that was in a part of India. But there was a war in 1814, and for the first time, the borders was created between India and Nepal. And the British won that war, and they said that on our terms, we are creating this border. Then something happened in 1857 in India. That was the first mutiny against the colonial regime in India. At that point of a time, Nepali king who was there, Jang Bahadur Rana, he have sensed it as an opportunity. The British were under a lot of difficulty because it was a revolt within the army. So at that juncture, the Nepalese king has actually supported the British regime at that point of a time. They have sent their army in support of British. And also, the Nepal have sent their armies to the First World War in support of United Kingdom, UK. So what had happened? Great Britain at that point of a time. So what had happened that Great Britain started realizing that Nepal is a very good friend. So in 1923, as a recognition of these support at a time of a crisis in India and also in the First World War, they have signed a treaty which says that Nepal is an independent country. So formally they recognize the border, that this is a border, and we consider that Nepal will never be a part of India. It's something different, it's an independent country. So from then onwards, there is a border between India and Nepal. There is a third very important treaty that is signed in 1950s after independence. And the treaty says that India and Nepal are good friends, and we will allow the citizens of both the countries to work and to work and free movement for the citizens of both the countries. So it's a unique relationship. You'll find a lot of Nepali people in Indian administrative services, in Indian army, in many other places. But something has happened in 2015, and that is the threat is that this relationship might just change. Madheshi, what is the problem with Madheshi? Before I come to the Madheshi thing, I would like to say that India at times have taken advantage of being a big brother. There was a time in 1989 when Nepal started purchasing arms from China. At that particular point of time, Indian government had a blockade of these borders in order to teach Nepal a lesson. And that was very much on the records. I'm not going to get into the referencing part as of now, but I can tell you the references. But at that point of a time, the idea was to teach Nepal a lesson, and Indian answer was that Nepal has a treaty with India, a defense treaty with India, and it cannot violate, it cannot buy arms from a third country, because this is a concern for our own security. So somehow, the idea of blockade is not something new. India had done it officially. Borders with India and Nepal. What is a Madhesh? Why Madhesh is so important and relevant? Nepal is divided into two different geographical units, if we can divide it into two different geographical units. One is hill and one is plain. The plain is Madhesh, and it has a borders with India. It's a very unique border because, as I said, that it was created during the colonial time. There was no border as such. You find matrimonial alliances between citizens of these two in this border regions. So they call it as a beti-roti relation. Beti means it's a matrimonial as well as sharing of food. So for all practical purpose, there is no such border in this region as far as the people are concerned. Officially, yes, but unofficially, there is no such borders. And Madheshi have a very different language. They have a language they share the language with the India, that part of India. And the food habits, the culture, everything is same in this border region. So Hill always has an apprehension for this region. The Nepalese Hill elites always has an apprehension, and they are assumed to be very closely linked with India. And that is true. Culturally, yes, of course. Because if you go to Kathmandu, they have a different language, they have a different food habits. But if you come to Madhesh, it's very, very different. It's very much like India. So there has always been a kind of a suspicion on them. And Madheshi people, they say that they are highly discriminated in Nepal because of this. So Nepal had a very tough political time in last decade or so. There was a revolution. There was a kind of armed struggle by the Maoists, and they have overthrown the monarchy. And right now, it's a democracy. What had happened after this monarchy was replaced by the democratic government? They thought of making a new constitution. It was all about the aspiration of people, because there was a big fight against the monarchy. So people thought that when the democratic government will come, all our aspirations will be going to be there. The constitution is going to reflect that. So Madheshi political parties also made a lot of demands for this constitution. In fact, for the first time, it was in 2012 that the Nepalese political parties, they got an election and a constituent assembly started making a constitution, but they failed. In 2014, it all failed because of number of issues. Again, in 2014, there was an election. In 2015, they came up with a constitution. But immediately when the constitution came up, it was the Madheshi parties which says that, well, our demands are not met, and we are not going to accept this constitution. And in order to pressurize the government, what they had done, except for also, they had a protest in Kathmandu and many other parts of Nepal. But what they had done is they have blocked the borders with India. And they can easily do so because they are in the border region. This was something unique in South Asia, because we haven't seen that there is a group of people who are blocking the border, which is a very core security issue for the states in South Asia. It is unimaginable that there is a group of people who will come and block the border. Blocking the border, what it means for Nepal, it means like cutting the lifeline of Nepal. Cutting the lifeline means why? Because Nepal is a landlocked country and it has a transit trade route with India. India is the only country from where they can have their supplies. Now they are exploring other possibilities like China and other countries, but it is primarily the India. So if you block a border with India, you are blocking the lifeline of Nepal. And it was a time post-earthquake. There was a reconstruction going on in Nepal. And then everything got jeopardized because of this blockade. Of course, the government came into the pressure. In Nepal, a lot of discussion has taken place. But what had happened, that the political parties in Kathmandu has used this opportunity to start a campaign, a propaganda against India. They said that, well, this is happening because Madhesis are in close relation with Indians, and it is happening with a support of the Indian government. New Delhi is a part of this blockade. Otherwise, it is not possible to block this. What was the official position? I will come to that later on, but that was a position by the Nepalese government at that point of a time. India bashing in Nepalese politics is not something new. We know that during the monarchy time, India has supported the democratic movement in Nepal, and then China card was played, like we will going to throw New Delhi and we will going to have more friendly relation with China. But over the last decade, there was a kind of a goodwill that has emerged from India, for supporting the democratic movement and for supporting the different sort of democratic aspiration of the people of Nepal. But after 2015, again, a situation has emerged where India has been used in the politics of Nepal and projected as the one supporting this blockade and also blocking the lifeline of Nepal. So that is a very interesting turn that has taken place in this case. So what had happened immediately after that? Immediately after that, there was a Nepalese Prime Minister has visited China and he has said that we are going to have another border or another transit route we are going to establish with China, and we are now going to have import via China. A lot of criticism has been came up that this is not possible because of the distance and many other things. But in Nepalese academia, there is a lot of praise for this. They said that this is like breaking a kind of a dependence on India. Even if not in a practical term, but even if it is somewhat a psychological thing, it is going to help us because we are really very much upset with the way what India had done. So, is India at fault in the blockade? Of course, officially India said that we have nothing to do with this blockade. This is entirely up to the Madheshi people. But unofficially, people says that New Delhi was at fault. New Delhi has allowed it to happen. There are stories about, and I'm not getting the pictures, but there are stories like whenever the protesters have find a trouble from Nepalese border security forces, they came on the Indian side. And when the Nepalese police forces has approached India to really arrest these protesters, India said, no, we are not going to do it. You know, so in a way, it has a kind of a support from Indian side. So what had happened at the end? Today we are in a very peculiar situation. Today we are in a very peculiar situation where India, which has been regarded as a very close friend of Nepal, is now being seen with a suspicion. And what had happened in Madhesh, the Madheshi movement, they have also failed to achieve their objectives. So India, there's a section in the Madheshi community which believes that India has not supported them when they required it. And there is a very strong section in Hill which believes that India has betrayed them. You know, So from the both side, a kind of a border is now emerging up with India. So what is border? And let me conclude this with a conceptual idea of borders. What is borders? And I like to quote it from one of the scholars, David Newman, who have said that, what is border? Once created, border became transformed into a reality, a default situation which impact upon daily life pattern and social modes, determine the parameters of exclusion and inclusion, and create the category through which social and spatial compartmentalization is perpetuated. And border is a kind of a thing which is in our mind. So here is a situation now emerged between India and Nepal, where actually for all official purposes, there is no security issues as far as the India-Nepal border is concerned. But psychologically, now a border has been created between India and Nepal. And we have seen in the recent elections in Nepal, a lot of anti-India rhetoric has been used. Very recently, the Nepalese Prime Minister has visited China, and he has came up with a lot of agreements. And one of the agreements is to have a road links with China, bringing direct things from China to Nepal and reducing their dependence on India. So somehow, it all started that from Madheshi movement, from the border blockade, which was seen just as a temporary political conflict of Nepal, is now emerged as something which is creating a mental border between India and Nepal. And we have seen it, that the kind of a distrust that is there between India and Nepal after 2015 border blockade, it's going up. There was a situation at one point of a time when there was a controversy on the Nepalese ambassador who was there in India. So ultimately, what is South Asia? The South Asian border studies, we believe that it is primarily about security, but Nepal is an exception. What I see, what I realize right now is that that exception is not going to be there for a long period of time if India will not take some proactive steps. And it will also come into the category of securitized border, but in a very different way. In a very different way. It is not going to have we are not going to have fences or strong border security forces at the borders, but in a very different way, the borders between India and Nepal are going to come up if India fails to take some concrete step at this juncture. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I need to spell out some caveats before beginning the presentation. I am a doctoral student at the Department of International Relations, South Asian University. And so said, my research is still work in progress. Being in the Department of International Relations, my interest in this particular topic that I'm going to present today begin with seeing the present understanding of borders with which the discipline of international relations moves. States are the primary actors of international relations, and borders, for that matter, have been seen as strict territorial lines between nation states. So I found that we are mostly obsessed with the present, the over-obsession of academia with the present manifestations of borders. So the existing intellectual vocabulary at any point in time seems to be so much convincing and ever-existent with their dominant understandings that they are seldom questioned and interrogated. The academic disciplines of inquiry eventually outgrow the need to wrestle with general concepts and engage themselves exclusively to their concrete instantiations in empirical reality. Say, for instance, the common understanding about international borders, more so in South Asia. International borders in this region are, seen mostly as strict territorial demarcations between nation states, the determinants of sovereign limits, and as securitized entities. Hence, the discourse on borders mostly, rotates around concepts such as border policing, patrolling, fencing, ceasefire violations, and so on and so forth. The strict cartographic manifestations of borders is, however, a thing of very recent past. And talking of South Asia, it's as recent as 1947. I argue that such understandings, is a kind of an ahistorical and asociological acceptance of the present. Obsession with the present. Yeah, so I find that, this is a kind of ahistorical and asociological acceptance of the present. Ahistorical to the sense that, it takes for granted the existing cartographic representations as ever existent and pushes them to the realm of taken for granted. And it accords very inadequate agency to the idea of change. Asociological to the extent that it a priori sees borders and their formations to be bereft of social interactions. It overlooks multiple trajectories of arriving at the present. And as a result, I argue, there has, arisen a set of illusions concerning borders. Let's call them reification illusions, naturalization illusions, and immutability illusions. And at this point, I draw from John Hobson and his 2002 work about titled "What's at Stake in Bringing Historical Sociology Back in International Relations." Hobson defines reification illusion as one where the present is effectively sealed off from the past, thereby obscuring its historical sociotemporal context and making it appear as a static, self-constituting, autonomous, and reified entity. He defines naturalization illusion as one where the present is effectively naturalized on the basis that it emerged spontaneously in accordance with natural human imperatives, thereby obscuring the historical processes of social power, identity, and social exclusion and norms that constitute the present. He defines immutability illusion as one where the present is eternalized because it is deemed to be natural and resistant to structural change, thereby obscuring the processes that reconstitute the present as an immanent order of change. And now that I find this sort of illusions concerning borders coming up in our region, in South Asia, how do we then treat it? How do we cure these illusions? So for that, I prescribe a historical sociological approach and with the use of genealogy as a research tool. Historical sociology. What is historical sociology? Here I line up a set of definitions by Theda Skocpol, Philip Abrams, David Smith, and all. To put it in a nutshell, historical sociology is a middle line or a combination of history and sociology. It's different from traditional history. It is different from traditional sociology to the extent that it's prime concern with change and historical context. It is distinct from traditional history because of its concern with social structures rather than recounting the stories of individuals and describing events. So if we take up one of the definitions, it says that historical sociology is a discipline which tries to make sense of the past by investigating how societies work and change. So one more caveat coming out at this point is that my study on historical sociology is still in progress, my study on genealogy is still in progress, and my study on the case is also still in progress. All your comments will be very much welcome, and it will help me deliver a better PhD and a better paper. Historical sociological study for borders because they are manifestations of historico-social alterations that vary across sociotemporal conditions. Looking back to the historical, while at the same time tracing the social, shall be an essential entry point to problematize the present, acknowledge the contingency of the future, and accord agency to the past. What is genealogy? Genealogy as a tool for social science research was, first taken up by German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche and his critique of representational metaphysics. Then it was also taken up by scholars such as Michel Foucault, Bernard Williams, and others. In international relations, it has been taken up by James Radarian, Jens Bertelsen, and very recently by scholars such as Vucetich. Genealogical analysis, in a way, traces how contemporary practices and institutions emerged out of specific struggles, conflicts, alliances, and exercises of power, many of which are nowadays forgotten. Its aim is to trace the struggles, displacements, and processes of repurposing out of which contemporary practices emerged, and to show the historical conditions of existence upon which present-day practices depend. This begins by identifying a present-day practice that, although taken for granted, is, however, in certain aspects problematic, and then traces the historical specificities that shaped such practice. It aims to trace the forces that gave birth to our present-day practices and to identify the historical conditions upon which they depend. Thus, by opening up the present to critical scrutiny of the past, genealogy may then cure the reification illusion. At the same time, by tracing the struggles, displacements, and processes of repurposing, out of which contemporary practices emerged, and showing the historical conditions of existence upon which present-day practices depend, genealogy then may treat the naturalization illusion. And third, by establishing the contingency of the present and the openness of the future, genealogy denounces the omnipotence of the presence and might cure the immutability illusion. There can be various ways of approaching these genealogical sites. For this paper, I have taken up the case of the erstwhile Ahom kingdom in present-day northeastern frontier of India. And I take up some of the concepts of Alexander Wendt and his landmark work, The Social Theory of International Politics. So briefly, spelling out the case, the Ahoms. The Ahoms are the offshoot of the great Thai or San race, which has their ancestral home in the highlands of Southeast Asia. Entering Assam from Burma through the Pangsao Pass over the Patkai Range, Sukapha, the founder of the Ahom dynasty in Assam, rested first by the Nonyang Lake in present-day Myanmar, and then gradually made advent to the plains further down. They reigned for almost 600 years. So here is a map of the Ahom territory towards the end of their reign in Assam. So it was around 1826 when the British East India Company took over the region. And it is a map that shows, more or less the region that was under their control during that part of time. The Ahom borders kept, expanding at times, and it kept changing its physical positions throughout the time. And the green portion that we see at this point in time was never constant. It moved around, towards the regions of the Singphos, Khamtis, through accession sometimes, through marital relations sometimes, and so on and so forth. So what's the curiosity about the Ahom borders? The interesting fact about Ahom borders is that although they kept moving throughout the 600 years of the Ahom rule, expansion was not always the tendency. While the boundaries were expanding to a considerable extent at one point in time, such period was often followed by a long period of quiet and absolutely no or very limited alteration in the boundaries. The period of calm at one point stretched for even 200 years. For instance, under Sukapha and his successor Sutofa, rapid expansion and consolidation of borders occurred. Thenceforth, not much alteration till the 14th ruler Suhungmu. These specificities draw attention towards the fact that there are some sociocultural and politico-economic conditions that shaped the alterations in borders. Now, genealogy allows us to look back and see how with changes in perception of the prevailing culture of anarchy and about the other units in the system, the perceptions about borders and thus their physical position altered. At this point, let us spell out these concepts that I bring from international relations. Anarchy. So anarchy here is a situation where there is no higher authority to discipline the units in a particular international system. And I draw from Hobbes and his three cultures of anarchy, Hobbesian, Kantian, and Lockean. To put it simply, Hobbesian anarchy is characterized by a perpetual state of possible war. The position assigned to the other units in the system is that of enemy. The tendencies are revisionist with no respect for the sovereignty of the other. And there's always a tendency of the self first. Lockean anarchy is comparatively less hostile than the Hobbesian situation with possibilities of minor disputes. Position assigned to the others is that of rival. Sense of respect for the sovereignty of the other exists. Kantian is a very pacified format, and it sees the other units as friends. Pacific settlement of disputes and collective security and cooperation are the order of the day. So bringing these concepts into borders, how these anarchy and subject positions assigned to others can shape borders. In Hobbesian culture, when the other units are seen as enemy, I argue borders are rigid, securitized. And there is always an expansionary tendency at the cost of the other. When the anarchy is perceived as Lockean, the other units are seen as rival. We see there are minor disputes and more or less peacefully solved, border issues. And then finally, Kantian, that is a friendly state of being, fluid and porous borders, collective security, and others. So formation and alterations of Ahom borders, some instances. So I take up particularly 3 instances because of lack of time. And about the Hobbesian structure, Hobbesian perception of anarchy. Say in the year 1513, when during the reign of the ruler Suhungmung, which I had talked a few minutes back, the neighboring Chutia kingdom made a deliberate attack on the Ahom territories. And as a result, the calm of the border was shattered, and the perception of anarchy in a way shifted towards Hobbesian. The other unit at once was seen as an enemy. The Chutia kingdom was seen as an enemy. And there arose an essence to, sustain the sovereignty. And therefore, the, need to shift the border further eastwards, which led to a war with the Chutias, and finally, shifting of the border, securitized border to the further eastwards and covering the Chutia kingdom. And then say when there was a period of Lockean understanding, the periods of calm, which kept coming up intermittently. There were no significant alterations in borders because the other units were seen not as much, as enemies. They were seen as rivals. If you attack me, fine, I secure my borders and we carry on therefrom. And then talking about the Kantian understanding, let's talk about the reign of Sudangfa. During the reign of Sudangfa in the year 1523, the reign of Sudangfa was between 1397 and 1407. Sorry, I forgot to mention it in the PPT. So at perceptions of Kantian anarchy, when other units were perceived as friends, the borders were seen as fluid and porous. So to mention that, in the reign of Sudangfa, there was a marital relationship with the kingdom towards the west of the Ahom territory at that point in time, which was the Kamota kingdom. So the Kamota princess Bhajani was, married to the Ahom king Sudangfa. And as a result of which, the other unit towards the west came up to be seen as a friend. And the idea of securitized borders at once shifted further westwards, and there was a sense of collective security between the Komotas and the Ahoms. And the borders now were supposed to be, the barriers, to the invaders from the further west. And as a result, the borders, shifted further westwards. So to conclude, I may say that across various cultures of anarchy and role positions, the Ahom borders altered. And these alterations can be traced through a historical sociological approach. There is absolutely no need to see the present as an ever-existent, self-constituted, autonomous, and unchangeable entity. It is essential to look at the present borders as malleable construct, seldom bereft of social interactions. The paper takes the borderland as the subject of study, where the borders actually exist. It engages with the history of the present and refuses to take present as a static, self-constituting, and reified entity. And it brings to light the fact that the shaping and reshaping of borders are seldom bereft of social interactions and social relations. Thank you.
Good evening. And let me also begin by thanking Dhananjay, Ted, and Professor Ivashita, and also ABS in general for accepting the paper and making me a part of this panel. As you can see, I am focusing, both of them are focused on the north and northeastern border of India. I'll focus on the western part of India's border. That is a border which abuts Pakistan. In South Asia, it is considered to be the arch rival of India. And there is a lot of antagonism between these two states, or at least the state apparatuses are antagonistic to each other, if not the people. So I'll focus on this border, but in this presentation, I'll try to bring out certain aspects which are only from the Indian side, because I conducted this field work in only on the Indian side, because it is very difficult to get access to the other side on this particular border. And within that specific border, a small district has been covered. But the field work was possible due to a grant from the University Grants Commission, that is the main granting funding authority or funding agency in India for universities. Within that, there is this program for University with Potential for Excellence, and JNU has this status with them, and the university where I work. So they granted this, and within that I work in this project. This project is titled as Border Theory and Globalization, Perspectives from the South. So one of the important aims of the project is to look or to examine whether it is possible to arrive at some conceptual formulations through these fieldworks, through these studies on India's borders, or if it is possible to, in any way possible to contribute to border theory. But largely, the project is fieldwork based. The outcomes may be more theoretically informed, but they will be generally informed from these fieldworks. I've not used many bigger concepts, bigger thinkers, but I've kept it very simple in the sense that there is an acceptance in recent times, or in the recent years, of narrations which emanate from particular border areas. And through those narrations, it may be a story, it may be an experience, it may be just a interaction with the border itself that can be translated, or that can be presented in a form which explains the border better than the observer itself. So this presentation also has narrative stories from these people whom I have interacted with, and those I cannot cover all of them, but few of them which I have covered are mentioned here. And these stories come from inhabitants of 3 villages along this border. And it is, I must also mention that if you travel along a border in India, especially where the population is sparse, or there is a or there are, in the case of especially India-Pakistan border, you need to be escorted by, or the security forces usually escort you to the border, even if you are visiting some border villages. And so same was the case with me. I was also accompanied by border security force personnel, and I also guessed later that there were some intelligence people also which were there. But nonetheless, I was allowed to do the field survey. One may also pass this off, this understanding of, or the presentation of narratives and stories as borderscapes, because borderscapes allow us to do all these activities, all these functions, or borderscapes allows us liberty to carry out all these points. That is, they look at contemporary spatiality of politics. In this case, how this spatiality is performed, understood, or both by the state and by the observer, as well as the people who live there or the border residents. There may be multiple geopolitical imaginations which these borderscapes cover. So these geopolitical imaginations again come from not only from the people who live at the border, but again state, and in many ways these geopolitical imaginations or this paper may also have been informed by my understanding of what geopolitics is or what India's geopolitics is. There may be, it is also possible to draw upon hegemonic borderscapes of the state versus the counter-hegemonic borderscapes which emanate from the border itself. And in this case, from these three villages which I have covered in my fieldwork. Borderscapes also allow us to look at borders as markers of belonging as well as places of becoming. Right? So, of course, when there is a border, it marks the belongingness for a particular people, that you belong to this part of the world or you belong to this particular territory which belongs to this state. And on the other hand, they also allow or they also reinforce some sense of understanding of place, of a place where we live. So that also is reflected in the narratives which I'll come to very soon. Borders also are paradoxical structures. The state, which is supposed to secure the inhabitants staying within its territory, also tends to use those inhabitants for security work. So in that sense, there is a paradox of how states function, and also there is a paradox on how people look at the state. On the one hand, they are asking for security from the state, or that is the normal contract, right? And then on the other hand, they also view the state as an oppressor. So it runs both ways. And this concept of borderscapes, of course, emanates from the work of Rajaram and Carl Grundivor. And in general, scapes come from Appadurai's work in 1990, wherein he describes 5 scapes. The case study selection has a very practical element to it. It is very easy access from Delhi, and it is due to the budgetary limitations which this project had on us. I also come from the state of Rajasthan, so language is a factor in interacting with the borderlanders. I could easily interact with them in their own language, though the dialect which is spoken in this particular area is totally different from what I would speak in my hometown. It is interspersed with a lot of influence from Sindhi, which forms a part of both Pakistan and India. Sindh is divided into both Pakistan and India. And then it also has elements of Urdu, Hindi, Rajasthani. So there are a lot of dialects converge at this border. But somehow I was still able to make sense of their language. Then it also helps, as I said in the beginning also, that one needs to have contacts in the border security force and the district administration, because borders in our part of the world are considered very, very sensitive areas. One cannot just travel to the border on his or her whim, right? One has to take the required permissions or needs to have contacts to be there. Or at least some information needs to go to the administration and the security forces that are there to travel there. Further, there is a low density of population, so I thought there will be less people to cover in my survey. So that was a little bit of convenience, but still, I covered quite a number of people. The border is generally perceived to be peaceful, but so if you look at India's national newspapers, you would hardly find any mention of this border. But if you look at the media, which is operating locally, you'll find every other day or every single day there is a story about some smuggler was caught, or some illegal activity had happened, or some Pakistani boy had unknowingly entered into Indian territory across the fence. And those kind of stories are a norm in the local media. So the general notion of it being a peaceful border is only at the superficial level, at the larger national level, but not at the local level. This is the study area. I traveled along this dark red line in both on the both dark red lines, and it was made easier with the help of BSF and Border Security Force and Army. It is a district, it is a district in Rajasthan, Jaisalmer. It's a largest state in terms of area. Rajasthan is the largest state in terms of area in India. But the district is a totally desert district. It's totally, there is hardly any vegetation or there is hardly any cultivation there. Within that, there is a subdivision in which is called Tehsil in Hindi. And then there is a village council, which I particularly covered, which is called Panchayat in India. It only helped that a former student of JNU is one of the council headmen or is elected official in this council, village council. The main village, which is the headquarters of this council, is called Tanot. It is 35 kilometers from the border. It is also known for a temple which during the 1971 war witnessed heavy shelling from the Pakistani side, but none of the shells which were fired, they did not explode. So none of the shell exploded, and that's why this temple is considered to be very, very pious, not only by the local people, but also by the people from Army and BSF, because they think of it as a protective temple where shells do not explode. And all those shells have been kept preserved in the temple itself for people to come and see. The temple itself is now run by the Border Security Force rather than by any, as one would have believed in the Indian context, that a Hindu priest would be running the temple, but that is not the case. The BSF runs the temple, the Border Security Force runs the temple. Let us look at the state narrative or the story from the state side. Recently, in the district headquarters, the government constructed a huge war memorial where many of the tanks and very armored vehicles which were captured during the 71 war are kept for display, and there is a sound and light show which runs, there is a theater which runs, there is a documentary which runs about the 71 war, and it actually is a eulogization of what the Indian forces did during this war. And and it is a very recent, I think, no, the flag is not visible. So it is again to instill a sense of patriotism and a sense of nationalism that is the sole intention of this war memorial to be constructed in that zone, because it is normally a very, very outlying periphery of, even in the state of Rajasthan, it is a peripheral district. It is, as I said, it is a totally a desert district, so there is no cultivation and a very low density of population. So such kind of monuments, such kind of installations are built to evoke sense of patriotism and nationalism. This is a victory pillar at the same temple. But I'll quickly come to the villages which I have surveyed. There is this village called, the names may sound very unusual, but still, there is this village called Kuriya Bheri, which is 16 kilometers from the border. It's a non-revenue village, and there is a specific reason for this being a non-revenue village, because the original revenue village was there prior to 1971 war. And when the war happened, the original inhabitants all left and migrated to another village. And so it was declared, it was removed from the revenue list, revenue registers, and it was never registered again. So the people who live there are now a part of another village in terms of revenue collection, but it is not still counted as a revenue village. This village has a small population of 100. There are 30 households, largely Muslim population, in fact 100% Muslim population. Their main occupation is they are all shepherds. They have huge number of goats and sheep and camels. And the village headman, not elected, but appointed, nominated by the people themselves in the village, because he has the largest number of goats and sheep. So he's the village headman. So the economic prowess of or economic status of a person is becoming, makes him the headman of the village. If you look at, and if we, during my interaction with this village headman, I found out that there are a number of children in this village. For them, there is a primary school, elementary school, and there is an officially appointed teacher from government of Rajasthan who never turns up. And he turns up only once a month to sign the register for the whole month and collect the salary. And that is the state of affairs in many parts of India, but specifically this village, because it's at the back of the beyond, even in India. It's really desert, it's really a geographical periphery, political periphery, it's at the edge of the state. So he has an excuse not to go there, and he really does not turn up, and he just signs the register. And if you speak to the villagers, they say that it's fine. If he doesn't turn up, he has a reason. The reason is that it is very far from the nearest town, and there is a lack of transport, so we don't mind even if he doesn't turn up. But then during the interaction, they said that it would have been better if we had a formally trained teacher coming to us. So they have made an alternative arrangement. So a local boy who has studied till, who has completed school, comes, stays in the village. They have provided shelter to him. They provide food and a nominal salary to him, and he teaches the school kids. Further, on more prodding, I realized by speaking to this old gentleman, he is the person, I realized that he understands because he has seen a lot during his lifetime. He says that he has seen the 2 wars, 65, 71, and furthermore, he has seen these deployments of forces during the 2001 attack on Parliament in India, and again in 2008 during the Mumbai attack. So he says that it is not good. War is not good at all, because we are the people first to be affected. So we have to move towards the interior of the territory, and there is total displacement. And these are the people, these are the students of this particular school. Very interestingly, none of these kids knew what India is. So that is a kind of a paradox, that the territoriality which the Indian state wants to exercise in its totality at the edge of the territory, at the edge of this state, is unknown to these young kids who live at the edge, live at these villages at the edge of the state. The second village is a village called Kishangarh. This is a very interesting location because it has a BSF, the Border Security Force Administration base. It covers 10 border outposts. It is a revenue village. It has 35 people only. There are 7 households, 6 Muslim, 1 Hindu. Naturally, and I say naturally with all my understanding, the Hindu household receives more attention from the BSF administration base there. And they provide a lot of, they facilitate this particular household with all the initiatives which come from under the from the district administration, or from the border security force, or from the army, right? And furthermore, this village also has strong social and family linkages with Pakistan. So on one side of the border, these people stay, but they have, it is possible that for many of them, their spouses live in Pakistan. And now they are finding it very difficult after the fencing since 1993 to even meet their spouses. Visas are difficult to come by from Pakistan. People argued that this village has historical significance. There is a fort which used to house businessmen from India on their way to the Silk Route, from Pakistan to Afghanistan to Central Asia. And generally, because it is located very close to the border, the BSF, the Border Security Force, and the army perceives this village, the whole village, to be a pro-Pakistan village. I thought this was very misplaced when I interviewed these people. they, during lengthy interactions, they all said that, what else do we have? This is what we are. Now we are Indians. And one cannot question their loyalty. But on the other hand, being very close to the BSF base allows them some benefits. The school runs smoothly. They have they argue that there are the monthly civic action programs run by the BSF and the border area development program by the BSF and the administration run very smoothly here. They have telephone connections, so they can still talk to their Pakistani spouses or relatives from there, but they still are very hopeful that the situation will ease. These are the pictures from this particular village, and these two people there in that picture in the top right corner are father and daughter, and these two are considered, according to the forces, as they say that the forces say that these are two people who know this area the best, and they can explain every inch of this land, every bunker from the Indian side as well as from the Pakistani side, they know the best. And this old gentleman, he used to be the most, that's what the forces told us, that he used to be the most dreaded smuggler during his times, and he has the most important information about what lies on the other side. So in many ways, the employment of these people in informing the state about, or in border work is very much important to the border security force as well as the army. Most of their information is always found to be correct about what is happening along the fence, and that's why the army values them the most. They derive the most information from these people. I was also allowed to visit 3 border outposts. One of them has now become a tourist place. Most of the Bollywood stars visit this place and click pictures with the soldiers, post them on their Twitter accounts, and there is always a news there. And then then there is a company post there. Of course, there is no permission to click pictures. There are quarterly meetings with the Pakistani Rangers company post, and one can see the Pakistani posts also across the fence. I was allowed to visit 2-3 more posts, but I cannot name them. But one is, as I said, it is a tourist spot, and most of the narratives where I interacted with people were pro-India, and because I think that there was also a presence of this BSF personnel which made these narratives pro-India. But on the other hand, I found out that BSF was using their services to carry out their border work. And sometimes they were helping BSF and army to actually find their resources. For example, camels are lost every day in this desert, so they will take the help of these villagers to find them. I would conclude very quickly, as I have been told that there is no time. I would conclude by saying that the peripheral situation of borderlanders actually pushes them towards border work, and which is very beneficial for the security forces. And on the other hand, even after being at the edge of the state, where the state establishes itself, where the state emphasizes itself the most, their conditions are very, very poor for these villagers. Their narratives in many cases were stifled because the border has cut short their narrative of trade, exchange, their movements, their mobility. All of that has been cut down because of the fence. They said that even after 1971, there was a lot of movement, even after the big war. But once the fence was erected, things changed totally. One can also now look at, there is a reframing of this district itself as a hub of solar energy in the Indian continent. They say that now it is becoming a source of renewable energy, and there is a lot of potential for solar energy in this district. And one can understand that there is a divergent borderscaping from the state versus the border. Thank you. This is.
Thank you, Krishnendra, and to all the presenters. I think I'll just leave the camel up while we continue the discussion. So I think that was an excellent display of the variety that's present in borders in South Asia. We moved from a sort of contemporary dispute, telescoped back into the past considerably, and then followed up with a really local examination of one specific site of border work and borderscapes. So I'd like to ask our discussant, Melanie van den Helsken, to come and comment on each of the three papers, and then I will be able to open up the floor. But Melanie, over to you.
Thank you. Sorry to speak again. It's late. I think was really happy. For me, I will not be able to come to Budapest, so was really happy to participate to this conference. And I think an important contribution of this conference is to bring together discussion in border studies in India, together with border studies in the US and in Europe. I think it's a kind of a recent development, and it's very interesting. And I think it's also what India has, and how it can contribute to debate in border studies here, is also these, each of these areas have specific connection between border, territory, mobility, citizenship, belonging, and I think this questioning of these interactions is something that is common to the three papers that we've heard. And something that we have discussed also in the panel this morning, it's the importance of the role in India of the state actually in the naturalization of the border. And the connection made between actually the equation between of the border with a cultural border, and here this question of naturalization has been discussed here, and it also leads to particular forms of securization. That is also one of the topics that has been addressed, and to the very fragile position of people living at the border, and the two papers mentioned the idea of suspicion. So maybe my question to the three of you, generally, I'm wondering if we could not go further in deconstructing this naturalization of the border, and it's a beginning of an endeavor, and I'm wondering if we could not push this idea further. And for example, looking further at alternative transgression from the people, and that's why also Professor Mina's perspective of looking at both perspectives is particularly interesting. So I will start with the last paper. The thing is, I found a lot of interest in your theoretical framework, Professor Mina, and the thing is, I had the feeling at some point that the way you interpret your data, your interpretation of the data, departed a little bit from your theoretical framework, and I guess it's something which is difficult. I assume that when you go to the Indo-Pakistan border, it's pretty difficult to take distance with the security presence, and so, but to try to take a little bit of distance with that. And for example, you explained that in the village where you worked, the presence of the state was mainly through security forces. And so there was the school teacher did not show up, and the border security force was recently arrested people who were suspecting of being spies, and was suspicious of everybody who was crossing the border, or even having ties to the other side of the border. Also displaced the population at some point, and you also explained that the nationalist discourse, that the people help also contributed to these bordering practices of the state through, if I understood well, right, through giving information to the BSF. So the thing is, I was wondering if, because at the same time you speak about smuggling, and there was one thing I found really interesting is that when, if I understood well, they appointed themselves, the villagers, a teacher, then the teacher did not tell to the children that they were actually living in a borderland, and did not even mention India. And I was wondering if that would not reflect actually the actual vision of this region by the people, which would be an unbordered area, and also an area where actually having ties with the other side of the border doesn't mean they don't feel Indian. It doesn't question their Indianness. And this what you call bordering, their contribution to bordering, actually, it would it not be more a reaction to suspicion rather than a voluntary contribution to this bordering process, and that their feeling is that actually having ties to the other side doesn't exclude being Indian, and each space of belonging do not exclude each other. So that would be some questions. For Professor Tripathi regarding Nepal, so it's interesting that you also have mentioned that the Nepalese have a pretty different opinion about what happened in 2015, and the thing is, partly, if I understood well, part of these opinions were that actually India fueled the Madhesi movement in order to put pressure on the government of Nepal at some point because of this connection to China and because of they were not so happy with the new constitution of Nepal. So I was wondering if at least, so if I may not wrong, you may tell me. So you looked at it also from the Indian perspective, and but I was wondering if we could not try to understand why the Nepal side looked at this at this event in this way, and actually the fact that the Madhesi are culturally close to India allows the Indian government to instrumentalize them in order to influence the negotiation with the Nepali state. So and maybe also to look at the point of view of the Madhesi themselves. That also could be interesting to add in the picture, to look at this from different angles. And for Udipta, I was thinking, so your framework is really much in line with the idea I'm trying to explain now. I think it may be probably, if you do more field work, you will also probably question your own theoretical pattern, and I think it may lead to question also the borders between your different approaches, the Kantian and the different models of understanding, and so I think at one time it would be interesting to say, okay, this is my starting point. I put it aside for some point and look at the data, and then come back to my fieldwork. But I found the first theoretical framework really interesting. Thank you. Finished.
Thank you, Melanie. I will just allow, if any of the presenters would like to respond briefly, perhaps we could, is there something specific you wanted to respond to? No? In that case, I will open the discussion to the floor. As we're on video, we do need to use the microphones, which is looking like a good exercise for myself. So if you could put your hands up. So I'll take 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, 4 in this pass, and then we'll get some responses and maybe go again, okay? So I'll go.
Thank you very much for this free presentations and very rich comments. Afterwards, I have one question to each of speakers, but a very short one. Starting from Dr. Tripathi, my question would be, we live in Vienna, so we are in Vienna now, and Vienna and Austria has this very rich tradition of being, have the semi-open borders, of having, I think, the different arrangements being between, let's say, the East and West, between the, 25 years ago, between the Eastern Bloc and the European Union. Wouldn't be it a possible way for Nepal? And is there any kind of, Nepalese movement to being, between India and China, and not with India or with China, without this kind of, being forced to take one or another side, and not to be open to both sides simultaneously. The second question goes to Mr. Burnach, if I really, I'm very sorry for misspelling your name. I'm very much interested in the concepts as you presented it, and the Locke, Hobbes, and Kant, and the approach to border. But isn't it? But you, from your empirical side, you focus on one kingdom of one principality, if I understand incorrectly. But I always understood the other way of understanding Kant and these three thinkers. It's interpreting them as thinkers of not one political unity, but international system. So would you also like to look at the whole system there, rather to look at different different episodes of the history of one principality? Wouldn't it be a way of, wouldn't it be even more interesting to do so? And a very short question to Dr. Mina. It's about property rights. And is it possible to have property on the other side of the border? And what are the other reasons to have a spouse on the other side? Is it something which is? Because typically in this kind of arrangements, having part of the family on the other side is the way of keeping the property, family property, controlled on the other side of the border. Is it so? This kind of, having a part of family on the other side, close family, is a kind of decision, or it's just a fate, something which happened to the people? Thank you.
Thank you. As one of the organizers of this session, I'm very happy to watch the Indian presence in the World Conference of Border Studies, but I feel as if I were in Delhi for your discussions. So let me put your discussion in a more wider perspective, comparative border studies in Asia, because this is a final session of the Asian borders. So I think that if we compare, particularly Ted and me and the Northeast Asian border studies, the area, Northeast Asian inner borders, it's a kind of Russia, China, Japan, US hegemon exchange history making borders, particularly on the Korean peninsulas, on others. And in comparison with kind of the Northeast Asia, South Asia's very, very Indian dominant, and plus the British Empire impact post-colonials. So fortunately, unfortunately, you are all Indians here. So could you tell me your South Asian characteristic of borders in comparison with other area borders? Because in Krishnendra, you are not tell, but you are the theoretician of border studies, and you pay much attention to Latin American borders. And also, Janajay, you are the ABS board members to pay more in the world and global south? This is the first question. Second question, the China impact in the contemporary sense. Because the Eurasian, including India, China, and others, border conflicts, basically in past centuries, in inland borders conflicts, the land borders confrontation. But recently, 21st century, it's shifted to south, particularly maritime borders conflict, of course, including India, China. But last year, the trend bit changed owing to Doklam conflicts in the Bhutan. It has caused mainly by Xi Jinping's One Belt, One Road policy, it to irritate the inland border. Now, I think that the Indian conflict on China completely changed, more harsh than before. Then it's kind of a new phenomena. Is it at the conflict zone and borders in Asia back to more middle or back to the inland rivalry? So I would like you or someone to reply, because I want to put the discussion in more broader Asian borders rivalry. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentations. They were very interesting. And I just want to pose a short question to Professor Mina. I found your presentation very interesting, very, just wonderful. But then I have a question as a researcher from the South also, as you are. I try to find local contents in the border, okay? Local meanings of the border. I believe that we cannot just take the concept of Westphalian border as such and apply it everywhere, even though we know we have nation state and stuff like this. So I see you brought even some theoreticians that are from India, I believe, Rajaram and such. And you gave also some examples, like the temple that became administrated by the armed forces, and also you mentioned lightly this case of this exchange of guards that is so widely known all over the world, with all this spectacle and things like this. So I would like to pose again the question, what are the local contents of the border, going beyond the idea of a line or a region and, the securitization stuff? Sorry.
Very much for your presentations. I thought it was very interesting. I have an observation and a quick question to Borua. And I think you're onto something with thinking about border through a historical, sociological perspective, and in particular through the processual approach. I think that's something very interesting. And however, in your presentation, especially when you were talking about your case study, you were categorizing the different historical periods according to the three authors you had selected, Kant, Hobbes, and the third one that I just can't remember at this moment. So I'm wondering how this works within this sociological or historical sociological approach, because it seems quite counterproductive to me. So maybe you can comment on that. Thank you.
Okay, so that was some rich and detailed questions to which you have a grand total of 4 minutes to respond. So if you could do it as quickly as possible, that'd be great.
The question on property, I think the fact that they have spouses on other side has a very temporal dimension to it. Right? As the geopolitical situation between these two countries has worsened, the instances of having these marital ties are decreasing. So when I speak of these spouses located on either side, it is either prior to 1993 or even if after it is 1993, less so after these three phases. that is 1999 Kargil war. So a decrease in number of people getting married in Pakistan, then 2008. So there have been phases where, and it has kept on declining. But even after the erection of the fence, these marriages were happening between the two sides. So, and it also does not largely relate to the issue of property, but it is more about being connected with their relatives with whom they have been connected through centuries. So marriage is one sure way of keeping connections with them or being in touch with them. That is how they perceive it, and that is how what I understood from the narratives. To Professor Iwashita's query, what is so specific about India's borders? South Asia's borders. One, the fact of coloniality, which is now very widely read, understood, and commented upon. But I found that there is a very important aspect about identity which pervades all these borders. People have very, very strong religious identities within their communities, ethnic identities, which are very strong, and which in one way or the other manifest themselves at these borders more prominently. The last comment on the Westphalian concepts or the being imported on in South Asia, I think I can cite an example of music, right? So the area which I am commenting upon has a very rich musical tradition, which is spread over both the sides. And it is, there are communities which are again spread over both sides and carry out these musical traditions very, very nicely. If you have a chance to look at YouTube, there are two channels which I can mention. One is called the Dream Journey, and the other is called Ajab Sheher, the Kabir Project. So if you look at them, these are the two channels which try to combine the music from both the sides. Right? So, and then there are many other things which can be explained in the context of religion, their religious practices, their rituals, which used to be very common, but okay, I'll stop.
Yeah, a very quick responses. Why not with China? What's the problem if Nepal extends its? The problem, there's no such problem. It will be good, but a technical issues has been raised, like Tianjin port, which is 3,000 kilometers from Nepal, whereas Haldia, from where this trade is taking place, is just 1,000 kilometers. So it will definitely, technically, people are raising doubts about it. And they believe that this relationship is coming more because of the post-Madheshi blockade thing. So that's a point. South Asia, Professor Meena has already responded to that. I will add my own idea, and that is security. And why I believe so, because based in India, India shares border with almost all the South Asian countries, except for Afghanistan, but that too is a controversial issue. India says that it shares border with Afghanistan. And what India does, like, it's reflect on the neighbor. So if there is a very strong security-centric understanding of borders in New Delhi, it is definitely going to impact all its neighbors, and they will also securitize their borders. So in that way, New Delhi is the key. I'm not saying that's a very happy situation, but that is the practical part, which I think so. Doklam, China, it's a very big factor. Of course, India is not comfortable with Belt and Road, despite its trade with China. And this is what we are going to see a lot in South Asia in coming times. And India is definitely going to, I'm not saying will resist, but in some way will try to intervene in all the South Asian countries. And that is what India has started. And that is why the Nepal thing has become so relevant. And because Nepal has played a card vis-a-vis India and China. So this is what we are going to see more in South Asia in coming times. And border issues with China is unresolved. It might become one of the points of contestation in future.
Thank you. I think that was a really interesting entry point at this juncture of my research. Very briefly, I would like to mention that I'll try to incorporate it further, but at this point, I would like to say that it does cover, to some extent, the other actors in the system. As I talk about the Chutia Kingdom, the Komota Kingdom, and the other neighboring principalities like the Kosaris, the Deuris, Dimasas. So it does, in a sense, covers the other units in the existing system at that point of time. But yeah, the Ahoms are seen as the main or primary actor in terms of whose relationship the other units are seen.
At least excellently brief. I think there are another couple
I'm so sorry.
Do you want to respond quickly?
Okay. So, so I take Alexander Wendt and his understandings of the three cultures of anarchy, and I argue that this can be a way to approach the genealogical site, which is the Ahom kingdom. I don't know if I am able to pass it across, but the thing is, I take it just so as to justify taking up, a genealogical study of the Ahom kingdom.
Discuss this on the way to reception. Okay, I think I will have to conclude the panel there. If you could join me in a big hand for each of the presenters and our discussants. And another one for yourselves for tuning to join us at this time at the end of the second day of the conference. So yes, another round. Come on, have some enthusiasm. We'll conclude there. But hopefully we can have a chance to discuss this as we're moving towards the Rat House for maybe a glass of something cold. So thank you everyone. Thank you, everyone.